Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from a stack of sources, turning complex topics into clear, engaging insights.
Glad to be diving in.
Today, we're plunging into something, well, truly monumental: the historical arguments for the existence of God.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And this isn't just about theology in a narrow sense, right? It's about centuries of profound human reasoning, observation, people trying to make sense of it all.
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is how, particularly in Western thought, philosophy and theology have just rigorously engaged with this question, developing these really sophisticated arguments using reason, experience.
Things everyone can supposedly access.
Exactly. For many people today, maybe arguing for God seems unnecessary, or maybe just intuitive.
Right, you either feel it or you don't.
Perhaps. But for thinkers throughout history, this was vital. It was about understanding their own faith, sure, but also about communicating it coherently, within their intellectual world.
So our mission for you today.
Yeah, our mission is to cut through some of that density, illuminate the core ideas, so you can walk away feeling genuinely informed about these intellectual landscapes and the huge questions they tackle.
That's the plan. We've gathered a deep stack of sources. We're talking ancient theological texts right up to cutting-edge modern philosophical analyses. We're boiling it down for you.
The shortcut.
Exactly. Think of it as your shortcut to grasping the biggest ideas around natural theology, and then later, the reformed way of arguing. We'll show you the frameworks, the arguments themselves.
And the counter-arguments, too. Can't forget those.
Definitely not. And why these debates still matter, why they still resonate today. We're here to give you a clear map, whether you're just curious or looking to really deepen your understanding.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's begin with natural theology. What exactly does that term mean? And why did thinkers feel the need to argue for God using just reason and observation, separate from the Bible or other specific texts? Seems like a particular choice.
It is a particular choice, and a foundational one for these classical arguments. Natural theology is essentially an intellectual project.
Okay.
It's about trying to demonstrate God's existence and maybe even figure out some of his attributes by appealing only to principles and evidence that are accessible to all thinking people.
Regardless of their background.
Exactly. Regardless of specific religious beliefs or whether they accept divine revelation, it relies, or claims to rely, purely on universal human reason and observation of the world.
Is there any scriptural basis for this in Christian thought, or is it purely philosophical?
Well, proponents find a basis right in the Bible, actually, particularly Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20.
Oh, okay.
Those verses suggest that God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since creation, just by looking at the things that have been made.
So the idea is creation itself points to a creator.
That's the interpretation, yeah. Making humanity without excuse, as Paul puts it. So while special revelation, like the Bible, gives specific, detailed knowledge, natural theology explores what reason alone can deduce about God from the world.
Got it. So what's the purpose then? If faith is seen as a gift, why try to prove God with logic? Doesn't seem like it would force belief.
No, and that's a crucial distinction. The purpose of these theistic proofs, as they're sometimes called, isn't generally seen as compelling faith in someone who's resistant. Faith, in this tradition, is ultimately a matter of grace.
Right.
Instead, these arguments serve several other key functions. They aim to show the rational coherence of believing in God.
So it's not just a blind leap.
Precisely. They help defend belief against philosophical attacks. They provide a reasoned basis for faith, fulfilling that call to, give a reason for the hope you have. Essentially, they're trying to show that belief in God can be intellectually solid.
That makes sense. It's about making a case for reasonableness. Now, I know these arguments get categorized. Is there a fundamental split in how they approach things?
There is, yes, and it's really important for understanding them. The most fundamental division is between a priori and a posteriori arguments.
Okay, Latin terms. Break those down.
Right. An a priori argument is one where the premises can be known just by thinking about them, through reason alone. You don't need to go out and look at the world or do any experiments.
Like math.
Sort of, yeah. Conceptual analysis. The ontological argument is really the main example here. It tries to get to God's reality directly from the very concept or definition of God. Pure thought.
Okay, and a posteriori.
A posteriori arguments are the opposite. They start with premises you get from observing the world from experience. Empirical stuff.
So things we can see or investigate.
Exactly. This category includes the cosmological argument reasoning from the universe's existence or change or causes, the teleological argument looking at order and perceived design in nature, and the moral argument, starting from objective morality or conscience. They all begin with some observable feature of the world and then reason towards God.
What's really interesting here is how these aren't just, dusty old ideas locked away in books.
Not at all.
They've evolved, right? Grappling with these huge, timeless questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is the universe orderly? Where does morality come from? These are living philosophical discussions.
Absolutely. Their endurance is remarkable. From ancient Greece, picked up and refined by Jewish, Islamic, Christian thinkers, reformulated constantly against new critiques.
Yeah.
It shows how deep these questions run.
Like the design argument shifting from biology to physics.
Exactly. Paley's watch to fine-tuning. It shows the underlying intuitions about cause, perfection, design, morality are just deeply embedded in how we think. They're not static. They're in constant dialogue with science and philosophy as they change.
And you mentioned their internal role, too, for thinkers like Anselm and Aquinas.
Yes, that's crucial. It wasn't always about converting atheists. For Anselm, his ontological argument in the Proslogion was framed as meditation. Faith-seeking understanding, fides quaerens intellectum, a believer trying to rationally grasp the content of their own faith.
Exploring its logic.
Precisely. And Aquinas' 5 ways, they come right at the start of his huge Summa Theologiae. Their main job there seems to be establishing the proper subject of theology, a being whose existence reason can grasp, and whose attributes, simplicity, goodness, etc., can then be explored systematically.
So the proofs ground the whole project. Show faith isn't just absurd.
Right. They aim to show that the God of faith was also the God of reason, at least in his existence, and basic attributes.
Okay, let's unpack that first one you mentioned, the ontological argument. It's probably the most unique, trying to prove God exists just by thinking about what God is.
It is unique and mind-bending.
How does that even work? It sounds like defining something into existence, like trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat just by describing the hat perfectly.
Huh. That's a common reaction, and understandable. It feels like a conceptual trick. But its defenders see it as pure logical deduction. Remember, it's a priori, no world observation needed.
Just the definition.
Just the definition. The aim is to show that God's very definition logically requires his existence. So, denying he exists becomes a contradiction, like saying a triangle doesn't have 3 sides.
Okay. Who came up with this verse?
The classic formulation comes from St. Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury back in the 11th century, in his work, the Proslogion. And remember, it was written as a kind of prayer, a meditation.
Faith-seeking understanding.
Exactly. So his core logic starts with the definition. God is a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. A liquid quo nihil maius cogitari possit.
The greatest conceivable being.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Anselm says, even the fool who denies God understands this definition. So this being exists, at least in the fool's understanding.
Okay, I can grasp the concept, even if I don't think it's real.
Right. Then Anselm uses a proof by contradiction, a reductio ad absurdum. He distinguishes between existing just in the understanding, like an idea for a painting, and existing in understanding and in reality, the finished painting. And he states, it's greater to exist in reality than just in the understanding.
Seems plausible.
So the steps go like this. 1, define God as the greatest conceivable being. 2, this being exists at least in our understanding. 3, assume, just for argument's sake, that this being exists only in the understanding.
The atheist position, basically.
Anselm calls it the fool's position, yeah. 4, if that's true, then we could conceive of an even greater being, one with all the same great-making qualities, plus actual existence in reality. But wait, step 5, this creates a contradiction. We just conceived of something greater than the greatest conceivable being. That clashes with our initial definition.
I see the logical loop.
Exactly. So step 6, the initial assumption that God exists only in the understanding must be false. Therefore, the being than which nothing greater can be conceived must exist in reality too.
Wow. It's elegant in a way, but feels like there must be a catch.
Oh, people thought so immediately. It's rooted in a kind of Neoplatonic view, where perfect ideas are almost more real than physical things. For Anselm, the perfect idea demanded actual existence.
So who first pointed out the potential flaw?
Almost immediately, a fellow monk named Gonilo. He wrote a response called On Behalf of the Fool.
Huh. Good title.
Is it? Gunilo created a parody argument. He said, okay, I can conceive of the most perfect island, the greatest conceivable island. By your logic, Anselm, this island must exist because an existing perfect island is greater than a merely conceptual one.
And since a perfect island obviously doesn't just pop into existence because we define it.
Exactly. Since that conclusion is absurd, Gunilo argued, there must be something wrong with Anselm's original logic about God.
How did Anselm respond? That seems like a pretty good counter.
Anselm's reply was crucial. He argued his logic only applies to the unique case of the being than which nothing greater can be conceived, not to contingent things like islands.
What's the difference?
An island, however perfect, is contingent. You can always imagine it not existing. But the greatest conceivable being, Anselm argued, must possess necessary existence. Its non-existence must be inconceivable. It's part of what makes it the greatest. This distinction between necessary and contingent existence became key.
Okay, so the argument gets refined. Does it pop up again later?
It does. Fast forward to the 17th century, René Descartes. He had his own version.
The I think therefore I am guy.
That's him. He defined God as a supremely perfect being, and he argued that existence is a perfection. Just like having angles that sum to 180 degrees is part of the essence of a triangle, existence is part of the essence of a supremely perfect being.
So a perfect being that doesn't exist is as contradictory as a three-sided square.
That was Descartes' line of reasoning. A mountain necessarily implies a valley. A perfect being necessarily implies existence.
But then came Kant. I feel like Kant throws a wrench into a lot of these arguments.
He certainly did for this one. Immanuel Kant, 18th century German philosopher, delivered what many consider the knockout blow to these classical forms.
What was his critique?
In his critique of pure reason, Kant famously argued that existence is not a real predicate.
Yeah.
A predicate is supposed to add something to the concept of a subject, describe a property it has, like saying the rose is red. Red adds to our concept of the rose. But Kant said existence doesn't work like that. It doesn't add any property to the concept of a thing.
It just says the thing is.
Exactly. It posits the thing with all its properties as actual. His example was 100 thalers coins. The concept of 100 real thalers is exactly the same as the concept of 100 possible thalers. All the properties are the same in your mind.
The only difference is one pile is actually on the table.
Precisely. The difference is actuality, not concept. So, Kant concluded you can't logically pull existence out of a definition because existence isn't part of the conceptual content in the first place.
That sounds pretty devastating. Did the argument just die then?
For a long time, it was largely sidelined in mainstream philosophy, yes. Kant's critique was widely seen as decisive against the Anselmian and Cartesian versions. It seemed you couldn't just think God into being.
But it came back. You mentioned modern versions.
Remarkably, yes. In the 20th century, with the development of modal logic, the logic of possibility and necessity, the argument got a new lease on life. Philosophers like Alvin Plantinga reformulated it in a way that aimed to sidestep Kant's objection.
How did they do that if existence isn't a predicate?
Plantinga cleverly shifted the focus. He didn't argue that existence is a property, but that necessary existence existing in all possible worlds is a property that a maximally great being would have to possess.
Okay, subtle shift. How does his argument run?
Plantinga's modal ontological argument is probably the most discussed version today. It goes something like this, simplifying a bit. 1. It is possible that a maximally great being exists. This is the key premise up for debate.
What does maximally great mean here?
It means having maximal excellence in every possible world. And maximal excellence includes properties like omnipotence, omniscience, moral perfection, and necessary existence.
Ah, so necessary existence is built into the definition of maximal greatness.
Exactly. So the argument continues. 2. If it's possible a maximally great being exists, then such a being exists in some possible world. That's just how possibility works in modal logic. 3. But if a maximally great being exists in one possible world, it must possess necessary existence as part of maximal excellence. 4. If it has necessary existence, it must exist in all possible worlds. 5. Therefore, a maximally great being exists in the actual world.
Wow, that's intricate. It bypasses Kant by talking about necessary existence as the property.
Precisely. The debate then shifts entirely to that first premise. Is the existence of a maximally great being, including necessary existence, even logically possible? If you grant that possibility, the modal logic seems to force the conclusion.
So what's the lasting impact here? Beyond the logical puzzle, what does this argument really tell us?
I think its enduring value, whether you find it convincing or not, is how it forces us to think about the concept of God as a necessary being, fundamentally different from everything else, which is contingent. It clarifies that core theological idea of a deity God's self-existence and its journey, from Anselm's Neoplatonism through Descartes' rationalism to Plantinga's modal logic, mirrors huge shifts in how Western philosophy thinks about reality, knowledge, and logic itself.
Okay, let's shift gears. Moving from pure concept to the world around us, the cosmological argument. This one starts with the universe itself, right? What does it observe that points towards God? Feels more grounded.
It definitely feels more grounded, starting with observable reality. The cosmological argument in its various forms is a posteriori. It reasons from certain very general, observable facts about the cosmos, like things changing, things being caused, things existing contingently to the existence of a unique ultimate cause or ground, usually identified as God.
So it's looking at the universe and asking why or how.
Essentially, yes. Its roots go way back to Plato and Aristotle, and it's been central in Jewish, Islamic, and Christian thought. The most famous classical versions come from Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. The first three of his 5 ways are cosmological arguments.
Okay, what are they? The first one.
The argument for motion, or more accurately, change. Aquinas observes things are changing, moving from potentiality to actuality. A cold thing becoming hot, a seed becoming a tree.
Stuff happens.
Right. But, he argues, following Aristotle, nothing can move or change itself in the same respect. Something already actual has to cause the change in something potential. A hot fire makes the wood hot. The wood wasn't hot itself initially.
Something has to initiate the chain.
Exactly. Now, this chain of movers, A moves B, which was moved by C, and so on, can't go back infinitely. Why? Because if there's no first mover, there's no second or third mover either. The whole chain wouldn't start. Since things are moving, there must be a first mover, itself unmoved. And this, Aquinas says, everyone understands to be God.
Okay, so no infinite chain of dominoes falling. There has to be a first finger pushing.
That's the intuition. The second way is similar, the argument from the efficient cause.
Yeah.
We observe causes and effects. Nothing causes itself because it would have to exist before itself, which is impossible.
Right.
Again, Aquinas argues this chain of causes can't regress infinitely. If you remove the first cause, you remove all the subsequent causes and effects. Since we do see effects now, there must be a first efficient cause, uncaused itself. Again, to which everyone gives the name of God.
So similar logic, focused on causation rather than change. What's the third one?
The argument from contingency, or possibility and necessity. This one observes that things around us are contingent. They come into being, they pass away. They can exist, but they also cannot exist. You, me, this planet, the stars.
We weren't always here, won't be here forever.
Exactly. Now, Aquinas argues it's impossible for everything that exists to be contingent. Why? Because if everything could potentially not exist, then given infinite time, which Aquinas was willing to grant hypothetically, there would have been a point when nothing existed.
If everything has the possibility of not being, eventually that possibility would be realized for everything simultaneously.
That's the idea. But if there was ever a point when absolutely nothing existed, then nothing could exist now, because nothing comes from nothing. Ex nihilo nihil fit.
Okay.
Since things do clearly exist now, it can't be true that everything is contingent. There must be at least one being whose existence is necessary, a being that cannot not exist.
Something that just has to be.
Right. And this necessary being either gets its necessity from another or it's necessary in itself. Since a chain of necessary beings depending on each other can't go on infinitely either, for similar reasons as before, we must arrive at a being that is necessary in and of itself. And this, he concludes, is God.
That's a powerful line of thought. But you mentioned something earlier. Aquinas wasn't necessarily arguing for a Big Bang-style beginning.
That's a really crucial point of interpretation, often missed. Aquinas, unlike some later arguments, wasn't primarily concerned with a temporal first cause that kicked everything off in time. He even thought, philosophically, you couldn't definitively rule out an eternal universe.
So his first cause isn't the first thing in a timeline.
Not necessarily. His arguments, especially the first two, are more about a vertical or hierarchical series of causes operating right now. Think of it like this. My hand moves a stick, which moves a stone. The stick's movement depends simultaneously on my hand's movement. Aquinas is arguing for an ultimate sustaining cause that keeps the whole chain of existence going at every moment. God, as the unmoved mover or uncaused cause, is upholding the universe now, not just starting it billions of years ago.
Like the electricity needed to keep the lamp lit continuously, not just the switch being flipped once.
That's a great analogy for it. It's about a simultaneous ontological dependence, not just temporal succession.
Okay, that clarifies the Thomistic approach. Are there other major versions of the cosmological argument that do focus more on a beginning in time?
Yes, absolutely. The most prominent one today is probably the Kalam cosmological argument.
Kalam.
It has roots in medieval Islamic theology, thinkers like al-Ghazali, and it's been powerfully revived in contemporary philosophy, especially by William Lane Craig. It's very direct, structured as a simple syllogism. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Much more focused on the beginning. How do they defend those premises?
Premise 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Is often defended by appealing to the metaphysical intuition that nothing comes from nothing, or asking why do only universes pop into being uncaused, but not, say, bicycles or elephants?
It seems intuitively true for things within the universe.
Right. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, is defended on two main fronts. Philosophically, they argue against the possibility of an actual infinite past, using paradoxes like Hilbert's Hotel to show that an infinite number of past events leads to absurdities.
Like you can always add more guests to a full infinite hotel. Weird stuff.
Exactly. And scientifically, they point directly to modern cosmology, especially the Big Bang Theory, as strong evidence that the physical universe had a finite beginning around 13.8 billion years ago.
So combining philosophy and science?
Yes. And the conclusion, the cause of the universe, is then argued to must be something itself, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, and plausibly personal to choose to create.
Any other major variants?
There's also the Leibnizian argument from sufficient reason, named after Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a 17th century philosopher.
Famous for calculus, too.
Indeed. This argument relies on his principle of sufficient reason, PSR, which basically states that everything must have a reason or explanation for why it exists and why it is the way it is.
Nothing is just arbitrary.
That's the principle. Leibniz asks the ultimate question. Why is there something rather than nothing? He argues the explanation for the entire universe, which he saw as a collection of contingent things, can't be found within the universe itself, because each contingent thing is explained by another contingent thing.
You just keep pushing the explanation back.
Right. So the ultimate sufficient reason for the whole shebang must lie outside this series of contingent things, in a necessary being, a being that contains the reason for its own existence within itself. And that, Leibniz says, is God.
Okay, so several powerful ways to argue from the cosmos itself. But these must face objections, too. What are the main challenges?
Oh, definitely. The cosmological argument in all its forms has faced a barrage of criticisms, very serious ones.
Like what?
First, the whole issue of infinite regress. Why can't the causal chain go back forever? Critics like David Hume argued that while an infinite series might be baffling, it's not logically impossible, and isn't an uncaused cause, which the argument concludes with, just as mysterious, if not more so.
Trading one mystery for another.
That's the critique. Then there's the very common who caused God objection. If everything needs a cause, what caused God? It seems self-refuting.
Yeah, that seems like an obvious question.
Proponents respond that this misunderstands the premise. The premise isn't everything has a cause, it's everything that begins to exist has a cause, column, or every contingent thing has a cause, Thomistic Leibnizian. Since God is argued to be eternal, never began,
Yeah.
and necessary, not contingent, the premise simply doesn't apply to him by definition.
Okay. A crucial distinction. What else?
Well, there are fundamental critiques of the very idea of causality. Hume famously argued that we don't observe some necessary connection between cause and effect, just constant conjunction. We see A followed by B repeatedly, and our minds create the habit of expecting B after A. So is causality a real feature of the world or just a mental construct?
And if it's just in our head?
Then applying it to the universe as a whole, something outside our experience, becomes problematic. Kant also argued causality is a category our mind imposes on experience, not necessarily applicable to the ultimate reality of the universe itself.
Then there's the fallacy of composition.
Right, argued forcefully by Bertrand Russell. He said it's a mistake to assume that because the parts of the universe need causes or explanations, like each contingent thing, the universe as a whole must also need an external cause or explanation. Maybe the universe itself is the ultimate brute fact.
It's just there, and that's all.
That was Russell's famous line. Why assume the whole collection needs a cause just because the individual items do?
And finally, modern science. Does that pose challenges?
It does, or at least interpretations of it do. Some readings of quantum mechanics suggest events at the subatomic level might happen without a deterministic cause, quantum jumps, or virtual particles popping into existence. This could challenge the Kalam premise that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Though that's highly debated, how to interpret quantum mechanics.
Very much so. Also, the Big Bang singularity itself, the very beginning point, is a place where our current laws of physics break down. So applying our normal understanding of cause and effect right at the singularity is tricky.
So, summing up the cosmological arguments, do they all point to the same kind of God? Or are the conclusions subtly different?
That's a really important nuance. They aren't just different paths to the exact same destination. Aquinas' arguments, based on Aristotle, point towards a timeless, immutable, pure actuality, the sustaining, unmoved mover. The Kalam argument points toward a personal creator who initiated the universe in time. The Leibnizian argument points towards a necessary being who is the ultimate explanation or sufficient reason for everything.
So, pure act, temporal creator, ultimate explanation, distinct concepts.
They are distinct, though traditionally identified with the same being. And the choice of argument can have different theological implications and different vulnerabilities. The Kalam, for instance, gets strong support from the Big Bang, but is also more dependent on current scientific models, perhaps.
But the argument adapts.
It really does. That's perhaps its greatest strength. It started philosophically and now engages directly with cutting-edge cosmology. The Big Bang gave the Kalam version a huge boost. It shows natural theology isn't static, it wrestles with new knowledge.
Okay, from causes, let's move to purpose and design. The teleological argument. This one feels very intuitive for a lot of people. You look at a bird's wing or the solar system and think, wow, that looks designed.
Absolutely. It's probably the most immediately persuasive for many. The teleological argument from the Greek telos, meaning end or purpose, is a posteriori, reasoning from the apparent order, complexity, and purposefulness in nature to an intelligent designer.
It taps into that feeling that complex functional things don't just happen by accident.
Precisely. While it has ancient roots, the classic super-influential version comes from William Paley, an English clergyman, in his 1802 book, Natural Theology.
The watchmaker analogy.
That's the one. It's famous for a reason. Paley says, imagine you're walking on a heath. If you find a stone, you might think it's always been there. No big deal. But if you find a watch, you have a different reaction. You examine it, the intricate gears, springs, levers, all working together perfectly to tell time. You'd inevitably conclude.
Someone must have made this. An intelligent watchmaker.
Exactly. The complexity and clear function point to a designer. Paley then says, now look at the natural world. Look at the human eye. It's far more complex and functional than any watch.
The lens, the retina, the iris adjusting.
All perfectly coordinated for vision. Paley argues, just as the watch implies a watchmaker, the eye and by extension, the intricate design throughout nature implies a divine designer.
So the logic is, human artifacts are designed, the universe resembles artifacts, therefore the universe is probably designed, and the designer is God.
That's the basic structure, yes. An argument from analogy.
Incredibly powerful intuitively. But this argument got hit hard, didn't it, by Hume and Darwin? A real one-two punch.
It did. Two massive critiques, one philosophical, one scientific.
Let's start with Hume. He wrote before Paley, but his points were relevant.
Yes. David Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion basically dismantled the logic of the design argument, even before Paley's popular version. First, Hume attacked the analogy itself. Is the universe really like a machine, like a watch?
It's much bigger, maybe more chaotic in places.
Right. Hume said it's unique. We've never seen other universes being made, so how can we infer a maker for this one? Maybe it's more like a giant vegetable or animal growing organically, not built mechanically. The analogy is weak.
Okay, weak analogy. What else?
Second, the inference. Even if we grant a designer, Hume asked, what can we actually conclude about them? The world is imperfect, finite. Why infer an infinite, perfect, omnipotent, benevolent designer?
We only see the workmanship, which isn't person.
Exactly. Maybe the designer is incompetent, Hume suggested, a stupid mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it was a committee of gods who argued a lot. Or maybe a junior god learning the ropes. You can't get from an imperfect world to the traditional god of theism based on this argument alone.
So the conclusion outstrips the evidence.
That was Hume's point. And third, he offered alternative explanations. Maybe the order we see is just the result of chance, given enough time. Particles randomly arranging themselves until an ordered state emerges. Or maybe order is just an inherent property of matter itself, no designer needed.
Okay, those are deep philosophical cuts. Then came Darwin.
Yes, Charles Darwin, a century later, delivered the scientific blow. His theory of evolution by natural selection provided a mechanism for generating the appearance of design in biology without a designer.
The blind watchmaker.
Precisely. Random genetic variations occur. Those variations that happen to help an organism survive and reproduce better in its environment get passed on more often. Over vast stretches of time, this non-random selection of random variations accumulates, building complex adaptations like the eye or the wing.
So you get complexity and function emerging naturally without foresight?
Exactly. It explained the very biological examples Paley had used, like the eye, through an impersonal natural process. That was devastating for Paley's specific formulation.
So did the design argument just vanish after Darwin? That core intuition about order seems strong.
It didn't vanish, but it dramatically shifted focus. It largely moved away from biology and towards cosmology and physics. The main contemporary version is the fine-tuning argument.
Fine-tuning, like tuning a radio.
Sort of, but on a cosmic scale. It points out that the fundamental constants and quantities of nature, the strengths of gravity, the electromagnetic force, the mass of protons and neutrons, the expansion rate of the early universe seem exquisitely balanced, just right, to allow life to exist.
How so?
Well, if gravity were just a tiny bit stronger, the universe would have collapsed back on itself immediately, a tiny bit weaker, and galaxies and stars would never have formed. If the nuclear forces were slightly different, carbon essential for life as we know it wouldn't be stable. The parameters seem set within an incredibly narrow life-permitting range.
It's like the universe's knobs are all set to the perfect frequency for life.
That's the idea, often called the anthropic principle. The argument then becomes probabilistic. Proponents say it's astronomically improbable that all these independent constants would fall into the life-permitting zone just by chance.
So chance seems unlikely. What are the other options?
Usually presented as three. Necessity. It had to be this way for some unknown physical reason. Chance, we just got incredibly lucky maybe in a multiverse. Or design, it was intentionally set up this way. Since necessity isn't apparent and chance seems wildly improbable, design is argued to be the most reasonable inference.
And they might also point to things like mathematics fitting the universe so well.
Yes, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics is sometimes used as another pointer towards an intelligent mind behind the cosmos.
So the argument adapted from biology's complexity to physics' underlying structure.
Exactly. It's a great example of these arguments evolving in response to science. Paley focused on biology. Darwin countered. The argument shifted to cosmology, where Darwinian explanations don't apply. It's a dynamic conversation.
But do Hume's philosophical critiques still apply to fine-tuning?
To a large extent, yes. Even if the universe is fine-tuned, Hume's point about the inference still holds. Why infer the specific God of Christianity? The fine-tuner could still be a deistic entity, aliens, a committee. The argument on its own struggles to get you beyond some kind of intelligent designer of unknown character. It usually needs backup from other arguments or revelation.
Okay, final classical argument, the moral argument. This one shifts from the physical world to right and wrong, conscience. How does it link morality to God? Feels very different.
It does feel different, focusing on our inner experience of value and obligation. The moral argument is really a family of arguments contending that the existence of objective moral values, duties, or even just our conscience is best explained by God. Its unique angle is aiming to establish not just a powerful creator, but a good being.
Getting closer to the God of religion.
Right. The most common form today works as an inference to the based explanation, often put deductively. 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. 3. Therefore, God exists.
Okay, premise 1 seems like the big hurdle. Why would morality depend on God?
Proponents argue that without God, in a purely naturalistic universe, what basis is there for objective morality? Morality would just be subjective preference. I don't like killing. Cultural agreement, our society disapproves of theft. Or maybe evolutionary adaptations, altruism helps the group survive.
So things we do, but not things we objectively ought to do.
Exactly. They argue naturalism can explain moral behavior, perhaps, but not moral obligation or the objective truth of claims like torturing babies for fun is wrong. For that statement to be objectively true, binding on everyone whether they agree or not, you need a transcendent foundation. A moral lawgiver whose perfectly good nature is the standard of goodness itself.
So without God, it's all just opinions or survival strategies.
That's the claim of premise 1. Premise 2 asserts that we do experience morality as objective. We argue about what's fair, we appeal to rights, we feel outrage at injustice, we condemn things like genocide universally. This deep intuition suggests we're grasping real moral truths, not just expressing feelings.
We act as if objective values are real.
Right. Even people who say morality is relative often don't live that way when they feel wrong themselves.
Are there older versions of this argument?
Yes, the link is ancient. Aquinas' fourth way, the argument from gradation, has a moral element. He sees degrees of goodness, truth, nobility, implying a maximum standard which is God.
The ultimate benchmark?
Sort of. And then there's Kant again. After rejecting the theoretical proofs, he brought God back as a postulate of practical reason.
How did that work?
Kant argued, we have a moral duty to seek the summum bonum, the highest good, where perfect virtue meets perfect happiness. But in this life, virtue doesn't guarantee happiness. To make sense of our duty to strive for this highest good, which rational duty implies must be possible, we have to postulate God's existence as a moral governor who can ensure virtue and happiness ultimately align, perhaps, in an afterlife.
So God makes morality ultimately rational and achievable.
That was Kant's practical argument. And more recently, there's divine command theory, like Robert Adams's version. He argues God's commands don't create goodness arbitrarily, but they constitute moral obligation based on his essentially good nature and our relationship to him as creator.
Okay, so several ways to connect God and morality, but this argument faces that famous dilemma, right? The Euthyphro dilemma.
Yes, classic challenge, going back to Plato.
Hmm.
Adapted, it asks, is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good?
What's the problem with either answer?
If you take the first horn, it's good because God commands it, then morality seems arbitrary. If God commanded cruelty, would that make it good? Seems wrong.
Makes God seem like a potential tyrant.
Right. But if you take the second horn, God commands it because it is good, then goodness exists as a standard independent of God. God is just recognizing it, not grounding it. That seems to undermine his sovereignty as the ultimate source.
So either arbitrary commands or God isn't ultimate. How do proponents respond?
The common response, like Adams, is to say it's a false dilemma. God's commands aren't arbitrary because they flow necessarily from his own unchanging, perfectly good nature. God is the good.
Yeah.
So he doesn't invent goodness, nor does he look to an external standard. His commands simply express his own essential character.
So goodness is grounded in God's nature.
That's the proposed solution. But there are other objections too.
Like what?
Secular moral realism. This denies premise 1. If God doesn't exist, objective morals don't exist. These philosophers argue objective moral truths can exist without God. Maybe they're like mathematical truths necessary, abstract realities we discover, not invent or receive from a deity. Justice is good. Might just be a fundamental truth about reality, needing no further grounding.
So objective morality without God is possible.
They argue it is, and then there are evolutionary debunking arguments.
Yeah.
These attack premise 2, objective moral values do exist, or at least our confidence in knowing them.
How?
Philosophers like Sharon Street argue our core moral beliefs were shaped by evolution for survival fitness, not for tracking objective moral truth. Natural selection would favor beliefs that promote cooperation and group survival, whether those beliefs are objectively true or not.
So our feeling that murder is wrong might just be an evolutionary hangover that helped our ancestors survive, not insight into objective reality.
That's the challenge. If our moral sense is aimed at survival, not truth, why trust it to reflect objective moral facts? It potentially undermines our confidence in premise 2.
So what's the takeaway on the moral argument? It seems closely tied to our deepest intuitions, but also faces big challenges.
I think it powerfully asks, where does our sense of objective right and wrong come from? If it's real, it points towards a good personal source more directly than the other arguments. But, crucially, that closeness to God's goodness makes it intensely vulnerable to the problem of evil.
Right. If God is the standard of good, why so much suffering and evil?
Exactly. The moral argument and the problem of evil are two sides of the same coin, creating a deep tension. Ultimately, whether you find the moral argument persuasive often depends on your prior beliefs about whether objective moral facts even exist, your meta-ethics. It's less a standalone proof and more part of a bigger clash of worldviews.
Okay, we've covered the classical arguments, ontological, cosmological, teleological, moral, trying in different ways to build a bridge from common reason or observation to God.
Right, starting from what's supposedly accessible to anyone.
But now we need to shift gears completely. The Reformed tradition takes a very different approach. Why? What's their starting point that makes it so distinct?
It is a fundamental departure, and you really have to grasp the underlying theology to see why. It changes everything how they view reason, evidence, even the possibility of a neutral conversation.
What's the core theology driving this?
Two things, mainly. First, the absolute sovereignty of God. The idea that God is in complete control, directing all things according to his will, including salvation. Second, sola scriptura, the Bible, as the supreme infallible authority for truth. God and his word are the ultimate starting points.
Okay, standard Reformed doctrines. But how does that lead to a different apologetic method?
The crucial difference comes from their doctrine of the noetic effects of sin,
Noetic, meaning?
related to the mind, to knowing. The idea is that the fall didn't just corrupt our will, it corrupted our intellect too. The unregenerate human mind isn't neutral or objective. It's darkened, biased, and actively hostile towards God.
Hostile, not just ignorant.
Actively hostile. Remember Romans 1.18. Sinful humanity suppresses the truth in unrighteousness. It's not just that people lack evidence, they are in ethical rebellion and twist the evidence they do have to avoid acknowledging God.
So the idea of a neutral common ground for argument is seen as fundamentally flawed from the start. If the unbeliever's reasoning is inherently biased against God, then appealing to that reason with supposedly neutral arguments is like asking a biased judge to rule fairly. It's doomed to fail, according to this view.
That's a radical perspective on reason itself. Did Calvin lay the groundwork for this?
He absolutely did. John Calvin, in the 16th century, affirmed that God's existence as creator is clearly revealed in nature, leaving people without excuse. That sounds classical so far.
Right.
But he also introduced the idea of the sensus divinitatis, an innate sense of divinity, or seed of religion, planted in every human heart. It's not a conclusion from argument, but a basic, immediate awareness of God.
Like an internal radar for God. Kind of. But here's the tension. Calvin immediately says that sin corrupts this sense. This innate knowledge, along with the evidence in nature, gets suppressed and twisted. Instead of leading to true worship, it leads to idolatry humans, creating gods in their own image. Even brilliant philosophers, Calvin said, vanish in their round globes, unable to reach true knowledge of God without Scripture and Christ.
So knowledge is there, but sin messes it up completely.
That's the core tension. Universally available knowledge, universally suppressed. And it's this tension that later Reformed thinkers like Van Til and Plantinga tried to work out philosophically. Calvin's sensus divinitatis, especially, is like the seed for Plantinga's later ideas about properly basic belief.
Okay, let's dive into the first major Reformed approach. Presuppositionalism, especially Cornelius Van Til. He rejected neutrality entirely. Why was that so central, and how did it change the game?
It was absolutely non-negotiable for Van Til. Based on those doctrines, God's sovereignty, noetic effects of sin, he argued there simply is no neutral ground, no shared facts or reason unbiased by ultimate commitments.
Every fact is already interpreted.
Exactly. You interpret everything through your ultimate presupposition. For the Christian, that's the triune God of Scripture. For the non-Christian, Van Til argued, it's the autonomy of the human mind, the belief that man is the measure of all things.
So starting an argument on supposedly neutral ground
Is already conceding the unbeliever's flawed starting point. It grants their autonomy, which Van Til saw as the root of rebellion. Because the unregenerate mind suppresses truth, just giving it more neutral evidence is pointless. It will just be distorted to fit the anti-theistic framework. The issue isn't lack of evidence, it's a rebellious heart.
So if traditional proofs are out, what did Van Til propose instead? This transcendental argument for God, or TAG, sounds different.
Totally different. A transcendental argument doesn't argue from evidence to a conclusion in the usual way. It argues for the necessary preconditions that make any knowledge, reason, or experience possible in the first place.
Can you simplify that?
Van Til's TAG is often summarized bluntly. The proof for God's existence is that without God, you couldn't prove anything.
Whoa. Okay. How does that work in practice?
The method is to show the impossibility of the contrary. The apologist demonstrates that unless you presuppose the Christian worldview, specifically the triune God of the Bible, you can't actually account for the things the non-Christian takes for granted, things like the laws of logic, the uniformity of nature needed for science, objective morality, even human consciousness and meaning.
So you show their own worldview self-destructs.
Exactly. The non-Christian has to borrow capital from the Christian worldview to even argue against it. They assume logic works, that the future will resemble the past, that objective value matters. But their own atheistic or autonomous worldview provides no ultimate foundation for these things. Van Til's analogy was the child sitting on her father's lap to slap his face, using the very support provided by the one being attacked.
That's a radical shift, arguing from Christianity as the only coherent framework.
It's a total Copernican revolution in apologetics. The debate isn't about individual facts anymore, but about which entire worldview makes sense of all the facts.
You mentioned a philosophical point about the one and the many problem being key for Van Til. Unpack that a bit.
Right. It's deep but central to his metaphysics. The one and the many is an ancient philosophical puzzle. How do you relate universal concepts or laws, the one, to particular individual things or events, the many? How does a universal law like gravity apply to every single falling apple? How do shared concepts relate to unique experiences?
Bridging the universal and the particular.
Exactly. Van Til argued non-Christian philosophies always fail here. They either end up in radical monism, everything is ultimately one, distinctions are illusions like some Eastern thought or Parmenides, or radical pluralism. Reality is just disconnected particulars, chaos, no underlying unity like some forms of atomism or postmodernism. Neither can make sense of our actual experience of both unity and diversity.
So how does Christianity solve it for Van Til?
The Trinity. He argued that only the Christian doctrine of the Trinity provides the metaphysical solution. In the triune God, you have ultimate unity, one divine essence, perfectly coexisting with ultimate plurality, three distinct persons. God is the ultimate concrete universal. This Trinitarian reality, Van Til believed, is the necessary metaphysical ground for the possibility of both unity and diversity in the created world, making reality intelligible.
So the Trinity isn't just theology, it's the key to metaphysics.
For Van Til, absolutely. It's why God isn't just an answer, but the necessary precondition for coherence itself.
Okay, so presuppositionalism sounds incredibly comprehensive, but also complex. What are the main criticisms leveled against it?
It's definitely complex and has faced strong pushback. The most obvious one is the charge of circularity. Critics say, you're just assuming the Bible is true to prove the Bible is true.
Seems like a fair point.
Van Til's response was basically, yes, but all ultimate starting points are circular. Everyone presupposes something foundational. The question isn't whether your system is circular, but whether your circle is virtuous, makes sense of reality, or vicious, leads to contradiction. He argued only the Christian circle is virtuous.
Okay, embracing the circularity. What else?
Fideism, the accusation that it's just blind faith, rejecting reason and evidence. Van Til and his followers vehemently deny this. They argue it's the only view that provides a rational foundation for reason itself, by grounding reason in a rational God. All other views, they claim, ultimately undermine reason.
So they see it as the most rational position.
Yes, and finally there's practical effectiveness. It's highly philosophical, very confrontational, your worldview is impossible. Critics question if it's actually useful for evangelism. It can come across as arrogant or just baffling to ordinary people.
It requires a lot from both sides of the conversation.
It really does.
Okay, moving to the other major Reformed approach, Reformed epistemology, associated with Alvin Plantinga. He shifted focus from proving reality requires God to asking what makes belief rational. How did he approach this?
Plantinga's approach, emerging later in the 20th century, is indeed distinct, though still rooted in that Reformed tradition. He shifts the focus squarely onto epistemology, the theory of knowledge and rational belief. His main goal is to defend the rationality of believing in God, even without traditional arguments or evidence.
Defending it against what, specifically?
Against the evidentialist objection. This is the common claim, especially since the Enlightenment, that believing in God without sufficient evidence is irrational, unjustified, maybe even unethical. Plantinga targets the underlying assumption of this objection, which he calls classical foundationalism.
What's classical foundationalism?
It's an epistemological theory about how beliefs are justified. It says your belief system is rational only if it's built on a foundation of properly basic beliefs, ones you don't infer from other beliefs.
Right.
And it has strict rules for what counts as properly basic. Only beliefs that are self-evident, like 2 + 2 = 4, incorrigible, like I feel pain right now, or directly based on sense experience. All other beliefs must be logically derived from this foundation.
Sounds logical enough. What's Plantinga's problem with it?
He argues it's fatally flawed. First, it's way too strict. If we followed it, most of our ordinary beliefs would be irrational. Believing other people have minds, believing the past is real, believing our senses are reliable, none of these seem to fit neatly into those foundational categories.
So it condemns common sense.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But second, and decisively, Plantinga argues classical foundationalism is self-referentially incoherent. its own central claim. A belief is properly basic only if it's self-evident, incorrigible, or sensory. Is itself not self-evident, incorrigible, or sensory?
Ah, it fails its own test.
Exactly. So, by its own standards, classical foundationalism is an irrational belief to hold. Therefore, the whole framework supporting the evidentialist objection to theism collapses.
Okay, so he knocks down the objector's foundation. What does he propose instead? How can belief in God be rational without arguments?
Having cleared the ground, Plantinga argues that belief in God can be, and often is, properly basic, rational to hold without needing proof from other beliefs.
How? Based on what?
He develops what he calls the Aquinas-Calvin model, or AC model. He picks up Calvin's idea of the sensus divinitatis. Plantinga posits that God designed humans with a natural cognitive faculty, this sense of divinity, specifically to produce belief in him under the right circumstances.
What circumstances?
All sorts. Seeing a stunning sunset, experiencing deep guilt or gratitude, reading scripture, feeling a sense of God's presence. In these situations, the sensus divinitatis just directly triggers the belief God exists, or God is good, or God is speaking to me.
So it's not an argument like, wow, beautiful sunset, therefore God must exist.
No, it's more immediate, non-inferential. The sunset experience grounds the belief directly, just like seeing a tree grounds your belief. There's a tree. You don't argue your way to the tree belief, you just see it. Belief in God, he argues, can function the same way epistemically basic.
Like perception or memory.
Exactly. Those are his analogies. Now, he adds his theory of warrant to explain how this basic belief can become actual knowledge. Warrant is what turns true belief into knowledge.
What gives a belief warrant?
For Plantinga, a belief is warranted if it's produced by cognitive faculties that are 1. Functioning properly, not broken or diseased. 2. In the right kind of environment they were designed for. And 3. Part of a design plan aimed at producing true beliefs.
Okay, so reliable, truth-aimed faculties working correctly.
Right. Now, here's the crucial move. If Christian theism is true, then it's highly likely God did design us with a sensus divinitatis aimed at producing true beliefs about him. So if theism is true, belief in God produced by this faculty is warranted and counts as knowledge.
So it's a defense of rationality if theism is true, not a proof that it's true.
Precisely. It defeats the de jure objection, the claim that belief is irrational regardless of truth, but it doesn't prove the de facto truth of theism.
What role do the traditional arguments play then for Plantinga? Are they useless?
Not useless, but secondary. They aren't needed for the belief to be rational initially, but basic beliefs can be challenged by defeaters, objections, or counter-evidence, like the problem of evil. If a defeater challenges your basic belief in God, then traditional arguments and philosophical defenses, like theodicies, can function as defeater-defeaters. They neutralize the objection and restore the warrant to your basic belief.
So they shore up a belief that's already considered rational.
That's their role in his system.
Okay, this sounds like a really powerful defense of the rationality of faith. But what are the main objections to Plantinga's reformed epistemology?
It has definitely faced challenges. The most famous is probably the Great Pumpkin objection.
The Great Pumpkin.
Oh, yeah.
And Charlie Brown.
Exactly. Critics ask, if belief in God can be properly basic, why not belief in the Great Pumpkin? Or astrology, or voodoo, or anything else? Doesn't this just open the floodgates to irrationality, where anyone can claim their pet belief is basic?
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Plantinga's response is that it's not an anything-goes system. A belief only gets proper basicality if it meets the conditions for warrant produced by properly functioning, truth-aimed faculties in the right environment, not subject to obvious defeaters. Belief in the Great Pumpkin, he argues, fails these conditions. There's no reliable faculty producing it, and it faces a massive defeater. The Great Pumpkin never actually shows up.
So there are criteria, just not the old foundationalist ones.
Right. Another major challenge, though, is the religious diversity objection. If Christians have basic beliefs produced by their sensus divinitatis, but Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists also have deeply held basic beliefs arising from their own experiences and traditions, and these beliefs contradict each other, how can any one set of beliefs be warranted as true?
The sheer fact of disagreement seems to undermine the confidence of any one group.
That's the force of the objection. Doesn't the awareness of equally sincere, seemingly basic but conflicting beliefs act as a defeater for the exclusive truth claims of any particular religion? It's a significant challenge for the view.
So, wrapping up Plantinga, how has he changed the conversation? What's his main contribution?
Plantinga really shifted the entire landscape and philosophy of religion. By successfully attacking classical foundationalism and the evidentialist burden it placed on theists, he changed the central question. It wasn't just, is there evidence for God anymore? It became the deeper epistemological question. What makes any belief rational?
Broadening the scope.
Hugely. He provided a powerful framework for arguing that belief in God can be perfectly rational and warranted as a starting point, not necessarily needing external proofs. He essentially restored the intellectual respectability of theistic belief within analytic philosophy, regardless of whether one accepts his specific model fully.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. From Aquinas trying to reason to God from the world, to Van Til arguing reality only makes sense if you start with God, to Plantinga arguing belief in God can be a rational starting point itself. Can you just quickly recap the core differences between the classical and reformed strategies?
Sure. It boils down to fundamentally different starting points and views of human reason.
Think two-step. Step one, use natural theology, cosmological, teleological, moral arguments on supposed neutral ground to show theism is plausible or probable. Step two, present specifically Christian evidence, miracles, resurrection, to argue this God is the Christian God, assumes reason, though fallen, is competent enough for this.
Rejects neutral ground because sin corrupts reason's ability to see God clearly. Then it branches. Presuppositionalism, Van Til, uses a transcendental argument, argues from the triune God as the necessary precondition for all rational thought, logic, science, morality. Shows non-Christian views are incoherent. Reformed epistemology, Plantinga, takes an epistemological turn, argues belief in God is properly basic via the sensus divinitatis. Doesn't need prior argument for rationality. Arguments serve mainly as defeaters. Let's hit those comparison points quickly. Starting point. Classical, common ground reason facts. Van Til, God, scripture. Plantinga, sensus divinitatis experience, fallen reason. Classical, impaired but capable. Van Til, ethically rebellious, truth suppressing. Plantinga, malfunctioning, but can still produce warranted belief via God's design. Role of proofs. Classical, foundational. Van Til, invalid if neutral, reformulated transcendentally. Plantinga, not needed for initial rationality, used to defeat objections. Goal. Classical, show reasonableness. Van Til, show impossibility the contrary. Plantinga, defend the basic rationality de jure of belief.
They really are quite distinct systems built on different foundations. Do they ever mix in practice, or is it strictly one or the other?
That's a good question. While the theories are very distinct in actual apologetics, people often use a more pragmatic, cumulative case approach. And apologists might borrow tools depending on the situation.
Like using a fine-tuning argument here, a presuppositional challenge there.
Exactly. Maybe use a classical argument to get a foot in the door with a scientist, then shift to challenging presuppositions if they hit a wall, or use Plantinga's ideas to reassure a doubting believer. So in practice, the lines can blur even if the underlying philosophies differ sharply.
So after this incredibly deep dive through centuries of thinking about God's existence, what's one final thought you want to leave us with? Something to chew on.
Well, we've seen this long, intense pursuit isn't just about different arguments for God. It's really about fundamentally different views of human reason itself, its power, its limits, its relationship to faith and reality. It really makes you step back and ask, which of these underlying pictures of how we know things, especially ultimate things, resonates most with your own intuition about how we actually navigate the world and arrive at our deepest convictions?
That's a great question to ponder. What an incredible journey through some really complex philosophical terrain. Hopefully you listening feel like you now have a much clearer map of the major arguments for God's existence, from the classical proofs to the distinct reformed approaches, and crucially, the deep disagreements about how we even start thinking about such questions.
It's a lot to take in, but hopefully illuminating.
We hope this deep dive has given you that powerful shortcut to being well-informed, maybe spark some aha moments. Keep asking those big questions, keep digging into them, and we'll be right here to help you unpack them on the deep dive.